I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 262 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. Everyone has a story. Who's writing yours? So if you're following along on social media, you'll know that recently I hosted the Brilliant Balance Client Retreat. Client Retreat is like our annual reunion for people who have been through a coaching program. And it is my favorite week of the year. I think if I'm honest, there's a couple of high points the way we've structured the Brilliant Balance calendar these days, but this one is so special to me because a number of years ago, we gathered everyone for the very first time. I think it was 2018 was the very first time that we hosted a retreat. And we've missed 1 year during COVID. We were not able to do an in-person retreat. And then last year we got back into it. So this was our fourth in-person client retreat. And when I was getting, when we very first were going to do it and we had never done it before, it was the transition from taking this community from a virtual community where we only knew the women we'd coached over Zoom. You know, that was it. That was the kind of maximum intensity of the experience was a Zoom call. I mean, little did we know back then that our whole lives were going to convert to Zoom for the better part of a year, right? We never would have seen that coming. But we were leveraging that technology to be able to coach women anywhere. You know, we have clients from all over the United States, in some cases outside the country, in Canada, in Europe, in Africa. Like we have had really great experiences coaching women all over. And Zoom made that possible. So I'm always so grateful for the fact that it exists and that I'm living in an era where that technology is in place. However, right, that said, there's nothing like bringing a community of extraordinary people together in person. And so when we had that experience for the very first time in 2018, I was like, boy, let's do that again. You know, how can we do that every year? And that's really was the inception behind the idea of making this an annual retreat. So we did that. It's traditionally in October. We had that event in October. And this year, every year I sort of try to pull together a theme so that I can teach some new content that we've not explored before, and we can kind of anchor the whole event around a particular theme. So this year, our theme was storytelling. And the reason that I picked that as the theme is that a number of years ago when I think I had two children, I might have only had one. I think I had two, and they were very, very young. I went to a retreat that was actually hosted by my church, and a concept that I walked away from that with like one sentence in my mind. And the one sentence was, everybody has a story. Everybody has a story, because that retreat gave us the opportunity to share those stories in a way that I'd never really experienced before. And I just remember thinking, it's like I had an entirely new lens on how I went out and walked around in the world, because I constantly had this awareness that every single person I was interacting with, whether that was the person checking me out at the grocery store, the person who'd cut me off in traffic, the person sitting next to me in church, like whoever it was, they had this comprehensive life story that I didn't know anything about. And while I was intersecting with them at this particular moment in time, the context of that story could really inform our interactions, right? And yet rarely do we have the chance to hear those stories. So I wanted to create an experience through Client Retreat where we had the opportunity to share some of these stories to drive deeper connection. And the reality is that, again, all of us do have a story. Often we have pieces of our stories that we embrace, that we retell over and over again. Often the best parts of our stories, but sometimes there are even really difficult parts of our stories that we've embraced and we tell over and over again. Like kind of anyone who meets us would know that thing. And there's also pieces of our story that we try to forget, or skip over or kind of bury, right? Never to be talked about. But the act of reintegrating our story and really owning the narrative is so powerful that that's what I wanted to address within this year's retreat. So we had 2 full days together, well, a day and a half together to really explore those stories, right? What has happened up until now, till this moment in time, and what do we want to have happen in the next chapter? So I thought in today's episode, what I would do is give you sort of a Cliff's Notes version or a high level of what are a couple of things that you could think about as it relates to your own story, both the chapters that you've already lived and the one that you're heading into, right? From wherever you are at this moment in history, the chapter that you're heading into. Now, I also brought a guest speaker into retreat this year. She is a 4-time published author and a former podcast guest, and also an alumnus of our program. So Susie Orman-Schnall was with us. And some of what I'm going to share today with you are some bits and pieces of the framework that she was sharing with us about what makes a good story. So I think when we sat at this retreat and we put ourselves in the seat of author, of someone who is writing a story, there's a very active voice to that. There's a strong sense of agency that you are the one with the pen in your hand or your fingers on the keyboard. And there's great power in that idea of assuming the identity of author of your story. It moves you from, this is all happening to me, into the perspective of I am creating this. This at a minimum, the events are happening for me. And then really the actions I'm taking, I have a lot of control over. So the first thing I would say we discussed and sort of illustrated and dug into is, as you look back on your story, the key is to honor it all of it, every minute of your story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I will tell you, and I shared this at retreat, for most of my life, I really wanted to pick and choose. I wanted to disavow or sort of forget about pieces of my story that I didn't think fit where I was going, right? I wanted to keep the very best of it and then ignore the rest, just pretend that wasn't a part of the story. But doing that, and I got great coaching around this, I would say maybe 3 to 5 years ago, I got really great coaching on this point of when you do that, it turns you into kind of a half human, right? You become an unrelatable character if the only parts of your story that you're honoring are the good parts, because that's just not true. It's an incomplete story and something in you knows that it's not true. And so it can sort of vibe as inauthentic, right? It can come across as there's something here I'm not getting. There's no way that this is the whole story, right? So as you look back on your own story, and we took the group through an exercise to do this, you want to sort of excavate for the parts of your history that you might be trying to skip over or forget about. And that's not because I want you to wallow there, right? This isn't about, okay, let's just roll around in the mud of the worst of our lives, because that would be tragic and depressing. But it is important to sort of look to those times for where did they create, I called them plot twists at the event, right? Where did they change something about the narrative arc that you were on? Where did they change you, right? Where did some of these elements, or where did you learn a lesson that you said, boy, I don't want to find myself in this situation again. So from this experience, I'm going to extract something that's a lesson that I can carry with me into the future. So as you look back on your story, I think this is really where we start grappling with shame, right? We start grappling with guilt. What are the pieces that I need to say, yeah, that was a part of my story, and I'm going to embrace it in its entirety. And there's great, great power in that. Okay, my friends, I have some big news for you today. After years of dreaming about it and saying, how great would it be to have our very own Brilliant Balance boutique, we did it. And the online doors are open. So if you love the podcast and you'd love to start your day with a Brilliant Balance mug, or add a little inspo to your office art, or cozy up in a super soft hoodie and a hat for those late to the bus stop mornings, Head over to brilliant-balance.com/shop and choose something that will remind you that you are brilliant because you are. And then I want to see all the pictures of you with your new goodies. So tag me on social media at brilliant_balance when it arrives. That's brilliant-balance.com/shop. Go have some fun. The second thing that we talked about is how important it is to own the narrative. So essentially, how we tell our stories matters. We can get into a lens where the whole story is happening to us, right? Where we're sort of passively experiencing a story. We're like along for the ride. And I think what's a more empowering narrative is how you played the cards you were dealt, right? You might have gotten a really bad hand once or more than once in your life. So the key is, how did you play those cards? What did you do with the situation that was handed to you? And empowering narratives really shift our perspective, even if they don't change our circumstances. So nothing in the facts of the situation has to change for us to find a stronger narrative. So when we did this session at the event, I used sort of a fictionalized story of someone who had grown up with a sort of absentee mother who was not very engaged in her life, and where the mother didn't really believe in her. She really never had a lot of encouraging messages or conversations with this parent. And when she got to school, she hit junior high and she found a teacher who actually was pretty important in helping her realize that she had a lot of potential. And she was tested and realized, like, wow, I'm actually really bright. And that created this fulcrum point where it kind of, in spite of her circumstances at home, she was able to find a lot of success in school, which really changed the trajectory that her life was on. So when we told that story the first time, we told it through the lens of sort of, look at how terrible my parent was to me. You know, there was so much neglect and she never believed in me. And in fact, it was so sad because no one ever believed in me until I got to school. And somehow, despite all the, kind of against all odds, I guess I managed to figure out how to be successful. Right. And it was kind of this womp womp version of the story where the narrative was really focused on everything negative that had happened and how, in spite of that, like, even though she never got her mom to really believe in her, she was able to go on and maybe do some things. The reframed narrative was very powerful. It was like, I didn't have a parent who was really present or who knew how to believe in me. And so she was at the limits of her capability as a parent. I was so grateful when I found an adult who did believe in me and who helped me believe in myself. And despite the fact that I never really was able to get my mom to see it, I was able to see it. And that changed everything because I started taking advantage of opportunities and I started crafting a vision for my own future that I owned. And this is where that led me, right? And you can just hear the difference. I'm massively paraphrasing here. But you can hear the difference in how the first narrative is sort of victim-based, even though the person has gone on to achieve some success. And the second narrative is really, she's the hero of the story, right? She's sitting at the center of the story, taking control of what she can control to steer her life forward. So when we think back on themes in our life, and how we tell those stories, we want to listen for, are there places where we have a disempowering narrative that we can rewrite in a more empowering way, where we have more ownership, we're giving ourselves more credit for what we actually did to get the outcomes that we got. Okay, so that's this piece around owning the narrative. So first, looking back, honor it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then second, own the narrative. Right? Embrace the facts, but then own the narrative. Shape a story that is helpful to you, that is aligned with who you want to become. And that leads to the third point, which is, as you look forward, live the story you want to tell. Live the story you want to tell, right? Susie, when she was speaking to us, said a good story is one where you have no idea what's going to happen, but you can't wait to find out. right? You have no idea what's going to happen, but you can't wait to find out. That's how I want you to feel about your life. That you aren't sure what's going to happen because none of us are, but you're in this trajectory where you can't wait to find out. Okay. And we talked about what makes a good story. And this is where I think a lot of us get tripped up. We start to sort of vision cast or future cast our own story. And we think about, how do I want this to unfold? And we write a story in our minds that has no conflict, right? We write a story where it is just smooth sailing, happily ever after. Everything happens effortlessly. And that's the vision we're holding on to. And then guess what? Life happens, something difficult emerges, somebody doesn't like our idea, right? We run into some kind of challenge and we're like, I must be doing it wrong. Time to abandon this story and go back to bed, right? But good stories have conflict. In fact, good stories have a number of things that are kind of predictable that we could take a look at. First is good stories have really interesting characters, right? They do more than just laundry and carpool and go to work and go to bed. There's something interesting about the human who's at the center of the story. And P.S., that's us in this case, right? We're writing our own story. We want to be a really interesting, dynamic, multifaceted character. So if you find yourself in a little bit of a rut where you're becoming a little one-dimensional, this is a good prompt to say, you know what, there's something about me that makes me more interesting. How do I let that out? How do I let that come to the forefront? Good stories have problems. That character, that main character has a problem. And because they have a problem, they want to solve the problem. They want to get out of it, which creates an ambition or a goal. They have like wants and needs, something that because they have this problem, this want or this need is not being satisfied. You might think about, Susie used the example of a main character who had a career in a bank and she just hated her job. Her job was so unfulfilling and she was so bored with her job and still kind of overwhelmed and busy with it. And because of that, everything in her life was kind of falling apart at the seams. She didn't feel like her relationship was good. She felt like she wasn't giving her kids a lot of attention. She wasn't taking particularly good care of her own health, right? And so the house was kind of always not quite where she wanted it to be. That one core problem of, I really don't love this career that I'm in, created a whole host of problems. And that created some ambition to change, right? I want to get myself into a career where I'm really fulfilled, where I love the work I'm doing. And that can help me have enough energy to manage these other pieces of my life. Then in the good story, there has to be a catalyst to change. Some kind of inciting incident has to happen that kind of moves the whole character into action. So in your own life, you want to look for what can serve as the catalyst. Now, it could be something in our fictionalized story here, like there's downsizing at the bank and this person loses her job. And because of that, she has to go embark on a search. It could be that her husband loses his job, right? It could be that they have to move to a new city for some reason. Some kind of catalyst has to occur that creates the change. And I was thinking back to after 9/11, right? How many people changed something big in their life because they got this reminder that life is really short. That was a massive catalyst. The pandemic has been a massive catalyst for people to say, oh my goodness, life can change in an instant. And I want to make sure I'm living the life I want to be living. So we're looking in good stories for catalysts. And then our main characters face conflicts and challenges. They have struggles, right? There is no good story. Think about good books, good movies, right? That you've ever enjoyed as a reader or a viewer, that there wasn't a conflict or a challenge. Usually there's a whole series of them. So if we forget to write those into our story, to expect that there will be hard times, there will be struggle, there will be obstacles, then we're forgetting that that's just how stories work. And so when we can kind of expect that they're coming, we're a little less caught off guard and it gives us the motivation to persist. Okay. And then I think most importantly, what we reminded ourselves of at retreat is that good stories transform the main character. Something changes in that person from the beginning to the end of the story, right? They learn, they grow, they change, like something in them is transformed. So the question to ask yourself as you're writing your story is, what are you steering toward? What's the transformation you're willing to undergo in order to be the person who can live that ending that you're trying to write? You know, that saying, like, what got you here won't get you there. What got you here won't get you there. That's at the essence of this transformation machine that happens in a good story. We have to become the person who can live the ending that we're trying to steer toward. So I want you to think about those elements. Live the story you want to tell, right? You want to write a story where you really have no idea what's going to happen, but you can't wait to find out. And you want to make sure you're clear in your story about the problem that you're trying to solve, the ambition or the desire that that creates in you, and what conflicts and challenges you're willing to endure, what transformation you're willing to go through to get the ending that is your heart's desire, right? I want you to imagine that you're the author of your story because you are. We told everyone at retreat, your life is your story. Write well, edit often. And that's what I want you thinking about as you contemplate what I shared in today's episode. You know, and listen, if you want some help with this, that's what we do in coaching. That's why this is what we were covering at the retreat. This is what we'll be doing with these women all year. So if you want some help, reach out and explore the idea of having coaching. You can just chat with me. You can do it. Just go to the website. It's brilliant-balance.com. And there's a link right at the homepage to schedule a consultation. And you can kind of talk to me about, would coaching help you write a better story? Maybe next year, you'll be in that room with us. I would love that. So that's all for today, my friends. Until next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.